No one listens to your shit. Ooh!
Merry Christmas!
Hello, lovelies. Let's do another comments video. I've got a drink, so hopefully I won't cough my way through this like I have been lately. And I am gratified to be closing out the year with 6,300 and a bit subs. There's been a recent surge, at least at the scale that I'm used to, of a couple of hundred people subscribing. And so I hope you stick around. If anyone wants to get me a belated birthday present, my birthday was on the 5th, or a Christmastide present, then please go and sub to my Patreon for like $1 a month. That's, $12 in a year. It's not much, but it would mean the world to me. That's what I want most. Alright, let's get into it, and let's get the Kalergi comments out of the way first. If you're new to the channel, which many of you are, I did a debunking video about the Kalergi plan conspiracy about, 4 or 5 years ago at this point, and I still get comments pretty much every day from frothing right-wing shitbags on that video, and it's usually the same sort of things, so cathartically I kind of take the piss out of them when I do comments videos. So Idlewild 073 says, the UK is overrun, boats keep coming, Londonistan is gone, Islam has taken over, look with your eyes. Okay, looking with my eyes, I see on the demographic information that the UK stubbornly remains over 80% white, with what diversity we do have, largely concentrated in a handful of cities. I look at the demographic information for London, and I find that even in London, one of the most multicultural cities in the entire world, the population is still 85% other than Muslim. The boat crossings remain minimal numbers of people when you compare them to the UK population, most of which go into the asylum system, where they languish for far too long because the whole system is underfunded, and many of them get returned or rejected. And besides, we need immigration because we kind of cut off our nose to spite our face, well, when it came to leaving the European Union. So you are wrong in every conceivable way. So the question I ask, and perhaps the question you should ask yourself, is why are you so wrong? Connor Smith says, all of this is being spoken by somebody with that symbolism on your hat, which was a goat skull and horns. Gatekeeping at its finest. Every comment on your video is going against what you say. I suggest you look up argumentum ad populum and consider the kind of people who are going to come to this video and then decide to leave a comment as well. Context is important. As to the goat skull on the old hat there, I do that on purpose precisely to bait people like you, because it outs you as reactive idiots. Right, let's move on, and hopefully the rest of the comments will be a bit more positive. On my Rebel Moon review, which I was surprised that I liked quite as much as I did, but I went in with very low expectations and a fondness for B-movies. Anyway, user Tylit, I think, says, I just hope it's better than Army of the Dead. I'm not ready to write off Snyder just yet, liked his adaptations and actually enjoyed Sucker Punch for what it was, but that one was very much lacking. I didn't mind Army of the Dead either. I thought it was interesting, schlocky B-movie, again, kind of things that I like. It could have done with being a little bit more in your face and OTT. and more violent and gory than it was. I get the feeling Snyder's being reined in a bit by Netflix, which is why we have this PG-13 version of Rebel Moon being released now, and the R-rated director's cut not coming out till the summer. And I suspect something similar happened with Army of the Dead. A general released zombie movie is kind of missing the point. Ignis Nova says, "You look like a Wookiee." Liberal Hyena says, "I don't know whether there are other aspects of the costume that you consider redolent of the Napoleonic era and the 18th century, but in case you weren't aware of it, gorgets were worn by German military police in World War II, and notorious even in Nazi Germany for their ruthlessness, so it's possible that this is what is being referenced." Possibly, but there were other aspects to many of the uniforms and so on, like certainly in the flashback instances with the more dress uniforms, they seemed more Napoleonic, certainly to me, and the detailing on the Empire troops' armor looked rather Baroque. So yeah, it's a mishmash of things, it's a mix, but that's what I enjoyed about it. Hey Mitch says, "I can't bring myself to watch this because of how the producers and Netflix screwed over Evil Genius Games." We don't really know the full details of what has been going on. Between recording the video and now, I have gone around and I've looked at the court documents and so on, such as there are now, but we really don't know what's actually going on there. It's a shame that this RPG hasn't been released. I would like to have seen what they came up with, but yeah, I don't know. It wasn't because we don't know the details. I didn't feel that I knew enough to not see the movie. Eloy C says, "Excellent review, Jim. Agree wholeheartedly. It was more fun than I expected." Yeah, was it Chris Gore from Film Courage? He hated it. This is an opinion I normally respect, and he made many of the same references that I had, as did other people on the critique I saw. But I don't know. I had managed expectations that were low. I was comparing it to all of the more recent Star Wars output, and to me at least it was better in every way. It had its heart on its sleeve. It wasn't without problems, but it tickled my 70s and 80s B-movie fancy, so that was nice. Your mileage may vary, of course, and that's fine. G.I. Joe Factions in Action, I did a review of that book. Jeffrey Spring says, "If you really want to test the YouTube algorithm, review something popular that you can say something positive about and truly mean it. You don't have to stop being yourself, but you should absolutely ride the wave to help out your channel. Somewhere there is a game where the Venn diagram of what you like and what feeds the YouTube monster are the same thing. Somewhere, but it's the negativity that generally draws the hits, unfortunately. I always say what I mean in my reviews, so I can't really do anything different there. And I did review something for 5th edition that I was positive about and truly meant it, which surprised me as much as anybody, and that was the Deck of Many Things book. So I don't know. Guess we'll find out. Judd Goswick says, "We do not speak of Cobra La. It lies beneath the sea where we put Highlander 2. Yes, I don't know what they were thinking. Well, okay, that's not true. I do know what they were thinking. They were thinking, as they did with Transformers, let's have a big event movie, let's kill off one of the characters, Duke, which they backed out on, and let's introduce, a new faction and a whole bunch of new figures, which in the case of Transformers was like Galvatron, and so on, and the Cybertronian Transformers. And in the case of G.I. Joe / Action Force, it was Cobra La, some of which I actually remember liking some of the designs and so on. They just didn't feel like G.I. Joe or Action Force. And indeed, I quote Destro from that movie quite often. How fortuitous. On an older video on safety tools and Ginny D, Feral Hyena posted saying, "So, people with trauma shouldn't roleplay, and modules should be played blind and without any creative adjustment from the DM in order to ensure that the group has fun. Sounds kinda ableist." Okay, I am slightly physically disabled, and I have mental health issues, and these are my things to cope with support perhaps, but they are my things to cope with and watch out for. Just like if I had a deadly nut allergy, I would be reading the ingredients lists on everything and the little warning tags on everything, if they're even made in the same factory as something made with peanuts, right? It's up to me to manage that stuff, and everyone else around me shouldn't be forced to compromise or forego the things that they enjoy simply because I have issues. How selfish do you have to be to think that that's an option, even? Pimp by Squick says, horror movies come with content warnings, usually by rating, but more specific warnings do come on movies hosted online. So, age rating is something I can agree with, but once you move beyond that, you're usually into spoilers, and certainly things like the BBFC site, where they give you the ratings on films, they hide the more specific warnings so that you have to click on it to reveal them. And even then, they try to keep them as general as possible so they don't spoil it. Some people, like Feral Hyena here, seem to want not just a general, rating or set of warnings, but they want an individuated list of everything that might traumatize them. And that's spoilers, and that's going to ruin the experience for everybody if you do that. It's similar to the pointlessness of trigger warnings. Like, if they're that triggering, then the text warning you that you might be triggered would trigger you. So your trigger warnings would need trigger warnings, which would need trigger warnings, which would need trigger warnings, and will be here forever. It's mentally subpar turtles all the way down. On the review of the Alien RPG, which was a while ago, Mega Squid says, I've watched a couple of your Year Zero engine reviews, and I have to point out that the dice system seems to make sense mathematically, but you always seem to say that failure is the default state. I don't agree with that. If we take a scientist that is fairly well-rounded with 3 in wits and 3 in observation, using a tool to help with their roll, they will get 7 dice, assuming they are not stressed. That gives them a 72% chance of success. If they push, it ups the success rate to 90%. Is the math wrong in the book, or do you believe that characters should succeed more than 72 to 90% of the time? Okay. Contextualize it. A 72% chance of success is a 28% chance of failure. And this is on a task where you only need 1 success, and this is someone who is a professional in the field, 6 dice plus 1 for tools, and equipped. You would expect them to succeed much more often on that first roll. In fact, you would probably expect a normal average roll at that kind of difficulty to come off more like 99% of the time. I think the way to understand it is not to look at the chances of success, but to look at the chance of failure. So on any individual D6, you have a 5 in 6 chance of not getting a 6. So on 1 die, you're going to fail 83% of the time. On 2 dice, you're going to fail 69% of the time. On 3 dice, 57%. On 4 dice, 48%. On 5 dice, 40%. On 6 dice, 33%. And that is the level where we would expect to get at least one success, but a lot of the time, still, you're not going to. And that, therein lies the problem, I think. And it's diminishing returns for each additional dice that you add anyway. The gap gets smaller and smaller. The increased chance of success gets smaller and smaller, so that even at 10 dice, the theoretical maximum without additional tool dice and so on, you're still going to be failing about 16% of the time. So going back to our scientists, let's make them a doctor. Would you go to a doctor who screwed up your diagnosis a quarter of the time? Probably not. Now, some people will say, oh, well, okay, you shouldn't make them make rolls, except when it is a stressful situation. But then you have no way in which to calibrate the difficulties properly. So, there's the problem. Instead of thinking about your chance of success, think about your chance of failure, and think about doing normal day-to-day tasks that shouldn't be super stressful. So, you shouldn't be pushing, because that will exhaust you very, very rapidly. So that's the way to think about it, I think. On the Blades in the Dark review, Jason Hill says, I'm not sure if you read these. I do. But I have a genuine favour to ask. Could you give a real concrete example of your critique of how the systems are too tightly coupled and how modifying one can bring the whole thing crashing down? I don't understand this at all. I'm currently working on porting Blades in the Dark to a different time setting genre, and it has been super, super smooth. I was able to apply pretty much everything without issue, dropping what didn't feel right and sprinkling in what was missing. But after watching a couple of your videos, I'm wondering what I'm missing. All of your other takes I have no problem with. We each have our own preferences, and I respect that you have your own tastes, and that's cool. I agree on a few, disagree on more, but in the end, those all feel like what do you want to get out of your Friday evening type stuff. But this one feels like an actual mechanical thing that has me worried that I'm missing something crucial. Right, so it's all the spin on Powered by the Apocalypse, right? And that has very set, very constricting playbooks. Blades in the Dark goes some way towards moving away from that. Dungeon World probably about the same, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But I can't tell you what the specific problem is other than that tying together of playbooks and mechanics without knowing what you're actually asking about. So feel free to leave a comment with a bit more detail, and I'll see if I can make it more explicit. On the Godbound review, Michael Mullen Fiddler, unfortunate name there, poor Michael Mullen, stop fiddling with him, says, Kevin Crawford is pretty creative, Worlds with that number is really cool. Two things to mention regarding games on this godlike level. One is the original Beck Me. Everyone seems to focus only on the basic expert part, but there was a subset of the rules that dealt with being an immortal, basically a demigod. I never played it, but it sounds interesting. This seems to want to do the same thing. I'd be curious how the two compare. If anyone has played both these games that you look at here and Beck Me, two superhero game systems can simulate godlike power in a PC while doubtless conjuring the wrong mood or flavour. Still, Champions hero games could do player character demigods. I mean, especially if you look at the source material, like Marvel, DC, they have literal gods, never mind demigods, wandering around. I have the Immortal books somewhere. So I have Basic, and I have Immortal, and I have nothing in between from the original Back Me set. I can't remember that much about it, to be honest, and without being able to dig it out, I don't know that I can help. I would say that Godbound is more God of War, Kratos, than it is anything else. Okay, so on my review of the Black Sword Hack, Patrick Standar says, I've voiced the same view as you on solo gaming. However, that it's changed thanks to Ironsworn, which I haven't read. Now I like it, but it's a very different experience and does not give me the same thing as writing literature. It's more meditative in some ways. I don't know. It just strikes me as a bit sad, like sitting at home by yourself and making characters because you've got nobody to play with. So maybe it's my past giving me issues with it. On the review of the Deck of Many Things, Kev O'Reilly says, the product design at Wizards is truly dire, a great opportunity to magnetize the outer box. At their price, it should be of the highest quality all around. I mean, the cards are obviously the focus, and now that they've fixed them, they are pretty good quality, but yeah, the finish just wasn't really there, and the slipcase should have been thick card like the slipcases of their books, if you ask me, which you kind of do. R. Larkinson says, experienced players and DMs know it's still one of the most dangerous and disruptive magic items in the game. After seeing it derail campaigns or essentially ruin and end your character, it's not something I'll ever use in any of my D&D games regardless of the edition. It's a hard pass from me, sorry not sorry. So they've weakened a lot of the more negative and perhaps more disruptive efforts, but they've also gone away towards making the cards more useful in other ways than random magical shit going off in your game. So yeah, I mean, I respect that and understand where it's coming from. If you do want to fuck up your game, get the Deck of Weird Things for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Doc Necrotic says, I haven't kept up with the criticisms of this book. I know there's the obvious, like books being overpriced. Could someone catch me up? So the billing was that there was this autistic paladin, yes, which was a self-insert from one of the newer diversity hires at the office that was put in and was now the actual creator of the deck and so on. Either they've walked that back a bit or it was being overstated. I mean, it is in there and it is kind of dumb, but I didn't feel that it really went over everything. There was a little bit of defensive writing saying that, you know, the deck has been very different at different iterations of its history, which felt like excuse making to me. But regardless, I still think it's a good product. I know I'm as shocked as you are. On an old video, The Trouble with Story Games, Quick and Dirty Roleplaying says, what ratio of meta-narrative play to immersive play would make the game go from TTRPG to story game for you, or war game for that matter? I don't know that there's an easily quantifiable number. I don't think anyone would argue that war games or skirmish games are RPGs to any meaningful extent, because what and where are the decisions you make as the character and their characterization. I guess when you break out a battle map for the Iron Kingdoms RPG or D&D or whatever else, you're still playing your character, so you're more in that mindset. But if it's a pure war game, you don't tend to make decisions based on the characterization of the pieces on the board. Even 40k, where you have these, you know, big rounded out war commanders who've been in novels and other media and so on, you're still going to make the tactical decision, which may be slightly slanted by whatever tactical bonus cards or whatever else you happen to have, right? But it's still not really role-playing, because you're not making character decisions, you're making strategic and tactical decisions from a god's eye view over the table. So weirdly, similarly to war games, in story games you don't tend to be making decisions point to point, immersed within the character, as to what the character would do, but rather you are playing as the player, not playing as the character, and you're making decisions and so on based upon how you want the story to go as a whole, along with the other players and the nominative, GM, but not as the character. And immersion is an elusive quality. It's something we normally try to seek in RPGs, to at least momentarily become our character. So perhaps the way to look at it is, what is the goal and the mechanism of the game? Is the goal to immerse yourself in your character? Do the mechanisms of the game intersect with that goal? What are you doing? I do this. The dice and the games master moderate the result and loop the conversation back to you. Okay, now what do you do? Right? It's what do you do? Whereas in a story game, it's what does your character do? It's a step back. Where do the mechanics interface? Do they interface with your decisions, or do they interface with the meta narrative? So that's probably word salad to a lot of people. It's pretty deep in game design nonsense. But yeah, so I would say probably a better way to look at it is, what is the goal of the game, and how do the mechanics interface with that goal, with the act of play. On the Candela Obscura review, a Tiny Bard says, should we put some horror in our horror TTRPG? Oh, but make sure they know we're morally superior. Yes, of course. Yeah, that's kind of how it feels. Someone else... Oh, no, I did pull out that comment, so I'll get to that in a sec. Devon674 says, it really is a beautiful book, though. Incredible production quality, gorgeous art, attractive layout. What's that Sex Pistols song? Pretty Vacant? Yeah. Hawkname1234 says, I've never seen a review of a game that opens up a paid product and shows every page for the viewer to see, while not discussing anything on the pages shown. This video is not transformative, used the entire work unnecessarily. It is a blatant violation of copyright. I can't imagine why you did that. It's not required for your critique. Bizarre, unprofessional behaviour on your part. Which may be the most retarded comment I've ever had on any of my videos, and we opened with comments on a racist debunking. YagCPC says, there are tiny OSR/NSR games that are far smaller in book size, have more depth to their worlds, and have tons of roll charts for everything you can think of if you want to use them as well. Yeah, it's amazing how many pages are wasted on that game and how much is missing from that game when you compare it to a lot of games that are little more than pamphlets and yet ooze with far more content and quality than that whole thing. On my video, Gen X is disappointed with you. East to West says, I'm disappointed in Gen X the same way I'm disappointed in hippie boomers. Another generation of failed revolutionaries who eventually got old and willingly entered the Matrix after failing to achieve any meaningful change, and now sit around suckling the establishment teat and LARPing their glory days. Maybe that's just every generation. So I think Gen X, as in most other ways, is a bit of an exception here. I don't think we saw ourselves as revolutionaries. We were quite nihilistic, exasperated, and I don't think there was much of a revolution to us, save some of the early versions of the current protest movements, but rather we just lived how we wanted things to be, regardless. Often felt like we couldn't change things, but even so, those acts, despite not being revolutionary, did craft a lot of change and make a lot of progress, which we're kind of pissed off at being rolled back. But I think Gen X, when you compare them with hippie boomers, I don't think we really did do what you say. It's it's hard to put a finger on, but there was a very different sort of attitude. Reflected in my novel Old Fat Punks, in fact. You know, why shouldn't I use this opportunity to sell my shit? I think every generation fails and has to assimilate to some degree or another. But I really don't feel like things have been wound back until these younger generations, who are, if you're going to call us revolutionary, then they're counter-revolutionary, reactionaries. Very bourgeois. Bear Naff says, somewhat tangentially, I'm around 8 minutes in, there's the Gen X disapproval of the rush to delineate and label everything. People spent an entire generation and a half breaking the definitional power of labels. You could be a man as manly as any other and wear a skirt. You could be as valid of a woman as ever lived and drive a truck. Now, unless you adhere to some unspecified set of stereotypes, you can't really be a man or a woman. This is really stupid and backwards. Like, you gave up all of that freedom and individuality for what? To make small talk faster and more precise? To banish uncertainty by giving everything a pigeonhole? That genuinely stupid take on things seems to be endemic. The failings in reasoning, like conflating gamers who are Christian with the people behind the satanic panic, seems to be general issue and widespread. Yeah, which I did agree. I thought that was insightful. Individualism gets a bad rap, but any collective is made up of individuals, and any individual is part of a collective. But that complex and messy individual freedom seems to have been ramped back, and if anything, the gender wars have made gender signifiers more important to people and not less, which is kind of ironic, really. Tiago Rodriguez, I think. Fellow Gen Xer here. Do you see that those ideas our cohort thought were so self-evident and the wave of the future simply disappeared in a single generation? That one is on us. We thought we could simply attack all icons and we'd be left with just everyone treating one another progressively. That one is on us. Progress can go in lots of directions, and it went in one completely different from the one we wanted it to go. We didn't bother to set up any positive models in place of Jesus, for example, whom we called a cunt, and then we're surprised that Talcum X and Osama bin Laden filled that vacuum. We were short-sighted. I don't know that we were, and I don't think all change is progress. What has been happening is not progress, it's regress. But what leapt at me from your comment was about tearing down icons and so on and not having anything to replace them. But that makes sense to me, because these icons and things were set up and people were told that they needed them, but we don't. We didn't. We never did. So I don't think there's much point in tearing down these things if you're just going to set up something else in its place. But somehow we have failed to transfer that knowledge onto these newer generations. So that maybe that's where the failure is, in not pointing out that, hey, you don't need this shit to people. There's an online cartoon which I like very much, which has been passed around for some time now, where everyone is born with a hole through the middle. Some people fill it with religion, some people fill it with television, some people fill it with other people. And the punchline to the comic is, I've found if you turn your body at just the right angle and run, you can make a whistling sound. I don't think there is a hole, but if there were, I'm happy running around and making whistling noises. Multiple Menace says, damn, I wish I had a drinking buddy like you. Look, this is me sober, right? I philosophize like a drunkard when I'm sober, so just imagine me drunk. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. Full Metal Dragon says, wokeism is the latest version of Marxism re-implemented, reimagined as liberal for the public perception, but it's not liberalism in any way. Those behind this wokeism are following the Bolshevik playbook of war through deception. In this case, deception of language via political correctness to indoctrinate and invert our language, to change our culture into this regressive mess of racism and hate that they're trying to force onto us. No, but our conversation is complicated by Burgistanis not knowing what political terms mean, and having their own definitions due to their ludicrously bipolar political system. From Marxism, I guess all you can really point at is that they have substituted material, meaningful division, that is, in terms of wealth and class. They've substituted race, gender, identity politics for that. But that's not what Marxism was ever intended for. It's not what left-wing thought was ever really intended for. And so I think that is a big part of why we see so many problems. When the stakes are real and meaningful, as material circumstances and so on are, I don't think that's the same as identity politics, even though we identify certain things as working class, middle class, upper class, nouveau riche, whatever else. There's still identity there, but at the root of it is a material issue. Wealth, these tokens that indicate how much labour you can get done for you. That's a material, real, impactful thing, whereas identity, while it can have an impact, is purely hallucinatory, right? It only has an impact because people choose to give it an impact. And by fixating and focusing upon identity politics since the rise of the new left, I think they've only empowered the kinds of identities that they reject, such as the white identity or the Christian identity, or whatever else. So it's a self-defeating thing, and it's not really Marxism. Not that most people know what's meant by that in the first place, but hey, there you go. Okay, we didn't end on a positive note, but we did at least end. Sang.
Flick pig. There's no big story to this, even the title's just a way to get away with writing fuck pig. It's not some earth-shaking attempt to thrust upon you the evils of meat eating. I eat meat because it's fucking delicious. David Cameron got me thinking about pigs. Then I got into some arguments with vegans. Then I made a horror dungeon game in which you play pigs trying to escape a horrible, fantastical slaughterhouse. That's about it. If that upsets you, do one. A print-and-play OSR dungeon crawl with pigs. Available at post-mort.com and drive-through RPG.
Word to your mom.